one question from the audience, and I'll start it off here. It goes, what do you do? And got to tell you, it's kind of interesting. It goes, how do you deal with thrombus being pulled through bifurcations like the SFA profunda or TP trunk AT, and the thrombus keeps getting pushed into the next side branch? So from the cases that I've proctored, that's not been a problem. Usually you take out one if there's stuff in the next branch, like if you take it out of the SFA, even if you have stuff that goes into the profunda, you then just take that out as well. Anybody else have any other opinions on that? I've not seen it getting pushed from one to the other or multiple times or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest benefits of the funnel too. I mean, the funnel's protective in its own right. If you know that you're working on one of the tibial branches, you're essentially delivering your funnel system down there and you're protecting yourself. It's not just dehydrating your target, you're protecting yourself from dragging it into another vessel, at least from what I've seen.
Super. Kevin, I'm going to leave you up on the mic for one more question. And, how do you decide when you're done? I mean, you've used Fogarty, which historically we know if you don't look, leave some behind. But, when are you done? Is it got to be perfect? Is it by flow or is it by, how do you decide I'm done with this case?
I really think that, that's a question that we all ask ourselves in each individual case that we're looking at. It's definitely an art, but it's backed up by, science. I'm always looking at the angiogram. I'm looking for evidence of, outflow from the vessel. I'm looking for contrast washout, but I'm supplementing it with a physical exam. I'm assessing whether or not there's pulsatile flow, but beyond that, you're putting the Doppler on the vessel and you're checking for resistance and phasicity, and, certainly not looking for a water hammer type of situation. But, I'm always impressed in any of these cases, especially when you start working with distal embolization, that if you really get one good vessel in line and those, previous criteria that I already mentioned end up playing out, you come back the following day and, you looked at my completion angiogram from that case from the woman that came up from Florida, and you're like, wow, that looks like it's a single vessel. It looks like it's hitting a dead end. Congratulations, you got an angiographic response. But then you go and even before you leave the operating room, you're assessing the examination. The resistance is, the signal sounding better, the resistance getting better, and then the following day you turn around and the collateralization within the foot, you end up having, a strongly monophasic signal, even in the DP distribution. So certainly perfect is never going to be the case. And I do think that, sometimes the more you do, you can ruin the results that you do have, so I think like I said, it is an art. You got to get comfortable with not having the absolute best angiographic findings, but you also have to realize that if things do tend to go the opposite direction, that sometimes you got to go back to war again. But certainly in these situations, and certainly with the experience of this device, it's just been really remarkable, really remarkable on the changes, especially working in those pedal vessels, getting something to track and pull out these more organized, thrombi or emboli has really allowed for us to, expand our abilities to be proud limb salvage warriors.
Thank you so much. Great input. Peter, how efficient is the registry representative of your experience clinically as well? That how efficient is the Pounce device clinically when you're doing a procedure?
I think it really is. It's twofold. For the standard cases, it's super efficient because you're basically just dragging a device back. And, as was mentioned just now, you don't get the same pushing stuff distal that you have to go get or pulling stuff across side branches that you have to get. You're really evacuating thrombus. That case that I showed working across the trifurcation where one pull cleared the popliteal, that's a huge deal. we just didn't see that with other devices. And then also for the nightmare cases, those cases where stuff embolizes, you try to get a channel, maybe you get a little bit of a channel, and then all of a sudden you're dripping TPA overnight. TPA doesn't work on organized stuff. So, these multiple day long cases that go back to the lab, get a little flow, drip TPA for 12 hours, go back in the morning. That sometimes you have to do that, but the majority of that has gone away now because all of a sudden you can debulk, you can establish inline flow, and you get people, out the next day, like what we saw in the registry.
Super. Thank you so much, Peter. And so we have one more question. And somebody's raising their hand. You have to put it in the Q&A because we can't unmute you. One of the other questions was, if you're doing this, what is the reality of using the balloon over the wire for loosening this against the wall adherence, and it's a really quickly increasing trend that we've seen across the United States, that it's been very efficient. It has taken some of the cases that historically took a number of extractions or pulls and really decreased it. The other thing that somebody brings up sometimes is that it's a fixed wire. It's not over the wire. That originally was done to keep it at a 7 French or less, and to mimic Fogarty, which 90% of them or 95% of them are not used over the wire. Do you find that a problem to rewire these thrombotic lesions? I'll leave that up to Kevin.
Not at all. I've had really no issues with it at all. Each time that you turn around and you do a case and you're talking about an average time, like I said, with regards to that hand, you do 2 passes and you're still at 20 minutes. If there was a problem with rewiring, certainly, your time's going to be going higher than that. So it's almost a non-issue. You have your sheath already delivered to pretty much, close to your target area that you're going to do. You get the wire across. The catheter is very, very passable, once you get there, and then the device itself is, exceptionally easy to use. I saw something in the question bank too about, what's the cleaning process like? And again, if you take a total of 20 minutes to do 2 passes, you can imagine that it's a very, very easy situation to remove it, pull the thrombus out. I always recommend utilizing, I like the Terumo destination sheath. As I'm pulling it through, I want to make sure that nothing is left in the sheath itself in the process. It just makes me feel like I have my own personal insurance policy in doing that. But I've had no problems with redelivering the wire in a very, very timely fashion.
Super. One last question before we get to the last slide. Dr. Patel, what is your venous endpoint? When are you done taking out clot? You'll need to unmute.
No, I got it this time. Thank you. No, that's a great question. So I think kind of like what the others were saying, after a couple passes, kind of, seeing how much thrombus you have out there and just taking an injection either through the sheath or through the catheter and seeing what kind of outflow you have and seeing if there's any spots where there's significant thrombus that you can go after.
Super. Thank you so much. I really want to thank our panel for great cases, great discussion. I always love working with you guys. It's always been, really fun to look at what's going on out there in the real world and how these things are being used. It makes me look a lot smarter than I am, but and I appreciate that. And we'll wish everybody a good evening, and thank you for attending tonight.